The Wagyu was perfect. A miniature monument to flavor, the patty seared to a dark, savory crust while the inside remained a melting, tender pink. The brioche bun, brushed with clarified butter and toasted, was a cloud of yielding richness. A sliver of aged cheddar, a dot of truffle aioli. It was, Jade decided, a burger that could make a person believe in a higher power. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the complex notes of umami and fat coat her tongue, entirely lost in the sensation. This was why she'd fought for a spot on the catering team for this event. Not for the money or the networking, but for the ingredients. The kind of ingredients a 20-year-old culinary student from Chicago could usually only dream of. Her red dress, a swath of elegant silk that hugged her generous curves, felt like armor in this room of sharp angles and sharper suits. Here, in a skyscraper penthouse overlooking the glittering sprawl of Shinjuku, power was the main course. It clung to the air like the expensive, smoky cologne worn by the men who moved through the space with the predatory grace of sharks. Jade, however, was focused on the canapés. She was a professional. She was here to work, and part of that work was quality control. This tiny, perfect burger was her whole world. That is, when she made the mistake of not looking up. Across the room, a man watched her. He was a study in stillness, a fixed point around which the entire party seemed to revolve. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, the color of a midnight storm, fitting his lean frame with surgical precision. He held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid untouched. His name was Rio, and the room belonged to him. Every bow, every lowered gaze, every carefully modulated laugh was an offering laid at his feet. His lieutenant, a man with a brutalist face, leaned in to whisper something. The council members are pleased. The offering from the Kudo Kai was generous. Rio didn't respond. His eyes, dark and flat as polished obsidian, were fixed on the woman in the red dress. He had noticed her earlier. In a sea of performative elegance and brittle smiles, she was an island of genuine substance. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried confidence that had nothing to do with the approval of others. She was not seeking attention. In fact, she seemed utterly oblivious to the invisible currents of fear and favor that charged the air. He watched as she picked up the miniature burger, her expression one of pure, unadulterated focus. She examined it like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem before taking a bite. And then, her eyes closed. A small, sincere smile touched her lips. In a room where every person was acutely, painfully aware of his presence, she had forgotten he existed. She had ignored him completely. For a burger. The lieutenant followed his boss's gaze. He saw a foreign woman, a big woman, one of the caterers. Insignificant. Sir? A slow smirk, thin and dangerous, curved Rio's lips. It was the first expression he had shown all night, and it made the lieutenant's blood run cold. That one, Rio said, his voice a low murmur that cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Bring her to me. The world returned to Jade in a jarring rush. The last, perfect bite of the slider was still on her tongue when a shadow fell over her. Two men, both built like brick walls and dressed in identical dark suits, stood before her. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The way they looked at her, with a complete absence of emotion, was more terrifying than any threat. Excuse me? Jade managed, her professionalism kicking in despite the sudden knot of ice in her stomach. Can I help you? The man on the right simply gestured with his head toward a set of discreet doors behind the main bar. It was an order, not a request. Her heart began a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She looked around for her manager, for anyone, but the partygoers were masters of avoidance. They saw, but they did not see. This was not their business. She had no choice. Wiping her hands on a cocktail napkin, she walked between the two men, her spine ramrod straight. The red silk of her dress felt suddenly thin, inadequate. They led her through the doors, down a silent, sterile hallway paneled in dark, gleaming wood. The muffled sounds of the party faded behind them, replaced by an unnerving quiet. The air grew colder. The hallway opened into a vast office. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, revealing a breathtaking, godlike view of the Tokyo skyline. In the center of the room, behind a desk of black, volcanic rock, sat the man from the party. The still point. He looked up as she entered. His eyes were even darker up close, holding a depth that seemed to swallow the light. A faint scar, a pale silver line, cut through his left eyebrow, the only flaw in a face that was otherwise perfectly, coldly symmetrical. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. His men melted back into the shadows by the door, present but unseen. Jade walked forward, her heels sinking into the plush black carpet. She sat, folding her hands in her lap to still their trembling. She told herself it was a misunderstanding, a complaint about the food, something mundane. The man said nothing. He simply watched her, his gaze analytical, unnerving. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. It was a weapon, and he wielded it with an expert's touch. Jade was a survivor. She knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. She met his gaze and waited. "You enjoyed the Wagyu," he said finally. It wasn't a question. His voice was deeper than she expected, smooth but with a rough, gravelly edge, like whiskey poured over stones. "It was exceptional," she replied, her own voice steady despite the frantic pulse at her throat. The marbling was A5, the grind was coarse, and it was cooked to a perfect medium rare. The truffle in the aioli wasn't overpowering. Another flicker of that dangerous smirk. "You are a student of your craft." "I try to be." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the polished surface of the desk. She noticed the intricate, dark ink that peeked from beneath the starched white cuff of his shirt, coiling around his wrist like a living shadow. Dragons, maybe. Or waves. "A chef should have a discerning palate," he continued, his tone conversational, which was somehow more menacing than an overt threat. "Tell me, what did you think of the bluefin tartare?" Jade's mind raced. The tartare. She'd checked it an hour ago. It had been perfect then. But something in his question, a subtle weight, made her pause. It was high quality. From Oma. The texture was clean. He repeated, letting the single word hang in the air. But not now. That was when she understood. This wasn't about a compliment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The floor dropped out from beneath her. "One of my men was about to be served," he explained, his voice dropping lower. "From a new platter. A platter you stopped from leaving the kitchen." Jade's blood turned to ice. She remembered the moment clearly. A new tray of the tartare was heading out. She'd glanced at it, a reflexive, professional habit. The micro shiso garnish on top was just slightly wilted, a bit too dark, as if it had been treated with something. And there was a faint, almost undetectable scent, something bitter and almond-like beneath the fresh smell of the fish. She told the waiter to hold the tray, that she needed to remake the garnish. She thought it was a simple issue of quality control, an aesthetic choice. "The garnish was compromised," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Compromised," he echoed, a dark amusement in his eyes. An elegant word for poison. The breath left her lungs. Poison. In this room, with these men. She hadn't just saved a dish from looking imperfect. She had saved a man's life. And in doing so, she had stepped from her world of culinary arts into his world of silent, lethal violence. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. "You have excellent instincts," Rio said, rising from his chair. He moved like the room owed him space, a silent, fluid grace that was utterly predatory. He circled the desk until he was standing behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne, cedar, and something else, something like cold smoke. "In my world, instincts like that are more valuable than loyalty. They are a form of currency." He placed a hand on the back of her chair, his knuckles brushing the silk of her dress. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure terror. "The problem," he murmured, his voice now directly beside her ear, "is that you are also now a liability. A loose end. The person who foiled the plans of my enemies." Jade squeezed her eyes shut. This was it. This was how it ended. in a silent office overlooking a city that didn't know her name. But, he continued, and she felt his breath stir the fine hairs on her neck, you are also interesting. She opened her eyes. His reflection was visible in the dark glass of the window, a superimposed ghost against the tapestry of city lights. He was watching her reflection, his expression unreadable. For now, you will stay with me, he declared. It was not a request. It was the closing of a caged door. You are my problem to solve. And I always solve my problems. That was the moment everything changed. She was no longer Jade, the culinary student from Chicago. She was a piece on a board she never asked to play on, owned by the most dangerous man in Tokyo. The view of the city suddenly looked like the view from the end of the world. The penthouse was a prison of silent luxury. Jade was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment back home, with a view of the Imperial Palace gardens and a bathroom carved from a single block of gray marble. A silent, grim-faced woman brought her clothes, simple, elegant pieces in dark colors that fit her perfectly, as if her measurements had been taken by sight alone. She was not locked in, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that every exit was an illusion. The two men who had first escorted her were always there, standing like statues down the hall, their presence a constant, suffocating weight. Rio was a phantom. For days, she did not see him, but she felt him everywhere. His scent lingered in the filtered air. His books, leather-bound volumes of Japanese philosophy and military history, were arranged with geometric precision on the shelves. The entire apartment was an extension of his personality, controlled, precise, and lethally quiet. Her only respite was the kitchen. It was a chef's fantasy, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and state-of-the-art appliances. After 2 days of near catatonic fear, her instincts took over. She had to do something or she would go mad. She started to cook. She found the pantry stocked with the finest ingredients she had ever seen. She cooked for herself, for the silent housekeeper, for the guards she never spoke to. She cooked because it was the only part of her life she could still control. On the 4th day, he appeared. She was reducing a balsamic glaze, the sweet, tangy scent filling the kitchen, when she felt the temperature in the room drop. She turned, and he was there, leaning against the doorframe, watching her. He was dressed in a simple black shirt and trousers, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the dense, intricate tapestry of his tattoos. They were waves, she saw now, the great wave, with a dragon coiled within it, its scales rendered in breathtaking detail. The men say you are trying to poison them, he said, his voice flat. Jade's hand tightened on the whisk. If I wanted to poison them, they'd be dead. A corner of his mouth twitched. I believe you, he walked into the kitchen, moving with that same unnerving silence. He stopped at the counter and picked up a small spoon, dipping it into a bowl of her miso soup. He tasted it, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second, much as hers had at the party. This is correct, he said, as if surprised. The dashi is clean, not from powder. Of course not, she said, the professional in her offended by the very idea. He looked at her then, a long, searching look. From now on, you will cook for me. And so a routine was born. She became his personal chef, a strange and intimate position. She learned his tastes. He preferred simple, traditional dishes, perfectly executed. He ate with a monk-like discipline, never speaking during the meal, his focus absolute. It was through food that she began to see the cracks in his armor. He ate natto for breakfast every morning, a fermented, challenging dish that spoke of a deep connection to tradition. He drank his tea scaldingly hot, a sign of impatience, of a mind that was always moving, always calculating. One night, she found him in his office, staring not at the city, but at a small, framed photograph on his desk. She had entered to clear his dinner tray, and he hadn't heard her. His guard was down. The mask of cold control was gone, replaced by a profound, hollow grief that seemed to carve years onto his face. Jade froze in the doorway, knowing she was seeing something private, something sacred. She saw the photo clearly. It was of a woman with a gentle smile and kind eyes, her hair long and dark. There was a softness to her that was the complete opposite of Rio's hard edges. He didn't touch the photo, but his gaze was a caress, full of a pain so raw it made Jade's chest ache. He must have sensed her. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. For a moment, she saw not the calculating crime boss, but a man drowning in loss. The mask snapped back into place instantly, his expression becoming cold, remote. She expected him to lash out, to punish her for the intrusion. Instead, he simply said, her name was Akari. The single admission was more shocking than any threat.
He had shared his wound.
She was my wife, he continued, his voice low and toneless. She was killed 5 years ago. Poison. The same kind they intended for my man at the party. It was meant for me, but she drank from my cup.
Shame.
That was the emotion radiating from him now. Not just grief, but a deep, corroding shame. The honor code that defined his life, the power he commanded, had been useless. He had failed to protect the one person who mattered. Jade finally understood. Her ability to spot the poison wasn't just a useful skill to him. It was a painful echo of his greatest failure. He wasn't just keeping her because she was a liability, he was keeping her because she was the living embodiment of a second chance he never got. The danger, however, was not an echo. It was real and escalating. The Kudokai, the rival clan, were not foolish. They knew their plan had been foiled by an outsider. They started hunting for a foreign woman, a caterer. Rio's network brought him whispers of their search. Jade was no longer just a witness. She was the target. We have to move, he announced one evening, appearing in the kitchen as she plated his dinner. There was a new urgency in his posture. They are getting closer. Pack nothing. The transition was a blur of controlled chaos. They left the penthouse through a service elevator, descending into the belly of the building. A black, armored sedan was waiting in the concrete labyrinth of the underground garage. Jade was bundled into the back, Rio sliding in beside her. The space was tight, her thigh pressing against his. The fabric of his trousers was a fine, hard wool. The car shot out into the neon-drenched streets of Tokyo. Jade stared out the window, her heart pounding. This was her chance. A crash, a stoplight, a moment of confusion. She could throw open the door and run, lose herself in the crowd. She could scream. Someone would help. The thought was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. As if sensing her turmoil, Rio spoke, his voice a low rumble next to her ear. Do not even think it. On the street, you would not last an hour. They were speeding through an underpass when it happened. A dark van swerved out of a side tunnel, ramming into their car with a deafening shriek of metal. The world became a violent, spinning chaos. Jade was thrown against the door, her head striking the window. Another impact, from the rear, sent the car into a full spin. Before she could even scream, Rio moved. In a single, fluid motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt and threw himself across her, his body a solid, unyielding shield. His arm clamped around her head, tucking her face into the hard muscle of his shoulder. The car slammed to a final, brutal stop against a concrete pylon. The air filled with the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. Outside, there were shouts, the sound of running feet. Rio's breath was hot against her ear. Stay down. Do not move. His voice was calm, precise, the voice of a man born to this violence. He was already shifting, a dark, compact pistol appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. The door beside him was wrenched open. He moved like choreography. 2 shots, precise and economical.
No guastigmotion.
A grunt, the sound of a body falling. He was out of the car, using the door as a shield. More shots echoed in the enclosed space of the underpass. Jade's driver was slumped over the wheel. She was alone in the wreck. Her mind screamed at her.
Run.
Now is the chance. Run. She pushed the door open. It groaned on bent hinges. She scrambled out, her legs unsteady. Freedom was 20 feet away, the mouth of the underpass. But she looked back. Rio was in a crouched firefight with two men taking cover behind the van. He was focused, lethal, a predator in his element. But he was outnumbered. She made a choice. She didn't run towards freedom. She ran back towards the car. Her mind, trained to see ingredients, to see components, saw a weapon. The ruptured gas tank was dripping a steady stream onto the concrete. On the floor of the back seat, she'd seen an emergency flare. Her hands shook as she grabbed it, twisting the cap. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and adrenaline. She crawled to the front of the car, staying low. She could see Rio, reloading his weapon with a calm efficiency that defied the chaos around him.
He didn't see her.
She lit the flare. It hissed to life, a brilliant, blinding red. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice raw. The two gunmen turned toward the sound, surprised. In that split second of distraction, she threw the flare. It skittered across the pavement, a fiery red serpent, straight into the spreading pool of gasoline. Rio saw it. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He dove for cover as the world erupted in a whoosh of fire and heat. The van was engulfed in a fireball, the explosion echoing like a bomb in the tunnel. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of flames. Rio rose slowly from behind his cover, his suit singed, a cut bleeding on his cheek. He looked at the burning wreckage, then at her. She was huddled by the car, trembling, her face smudged with soot, the red of her dress a stark slash against the grimy concrete. He walked over to her, his pistol still in his hand. He stopped in front of her, looking down. She thought he would be angry that she had interfered, that she had disobeyed. He crouched down, his movements stiff. He reached out, not with his gun hand, but with the other. His fingers gently brushed a piece of debris from her hair. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, it shattered her composure. "You could have run," he said, his voice rough. "You would have died," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. He stared at her, and in the flickering firelight, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not amusement, not calculation. Something that looked terrifyingly like respect. He had seen her as a problem, a liability, a curiosity. Now he saw her as something else entirely. And that, she knew, was far more dangerous. The safe house was a traditional home, hidden behind high walls in a quiet, anonymous suburb. It was a world of tatami mats, paper screens, and the scent of old cypress wood. The silence here was different from the penthouse. It was an ancient, breathing quiet, but the tension was a wire pulled taut between them. Rio had a deep gash on his arm from the ambush, stitched crudely by one of his men. It was inflamed, angry-looking. Jade, watching him favor it, felt a surge of professional impatience. "That's going to get infected," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "The stitches are too tight." He glanced at his arm, then at her, his expression dismissive. "It will heal." "Not if you get sepsis," she retorted. "Let me fix it." He stared at her, his dark eyes narrowed. Trust was not in his nature, but he had seen her under fire. He had seen her choose him over her own freedom. After a long, charged moment, he gave a curt nod. She gathered what she needed. A first aid kit, a bottle of whiskey for antiseptic, and a small, sharp knife from the kitchen she sterilized in the flame of the gas stove. She knelt before him where he sat on the floor, the low table between them. "This will hurt," she warned. "I have endured worse," he said flatly. Her fingers were steady as she cut the clumsy stitches and cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but she could feel the rigid control in his muscles, the sheer force of what it took for him to remain still under her touch. Her hands were gentle but efficient. This was her element, a different kind of precision. As she worked, she became aware of the intimacy of the act, her hands on his body, the faint smell of smoke and cedar that clung to his skin, the heat of his blood. While she stitched the wound closed with neat, even sutures, her gaze fell upon a stack of papers on the table. Ledgers. She couldn't read the characters, but she could read numbers. And the numbers told a story of debt, of lives systematically dismantled. Businesses seized, families broken, people forced into servitude over sums that were, to a man like him, trivial. It was cold, methodical, and utterly ruthless. This was the man whose wound she was tending. A man who built his empire on the ruins of other people's lives. The knowledge settled in her stomach like a stone. It should have made her run. The moment she was done, she should have found a way out, no matter the risk. But she couldn't, because just as she was tying off the last stitch, his phone, lying on the table, buzzed. The screen lit up with a picture message. Rio glanced at it, and his entire body went rigid. A cold, lethal stillness emanated from him, more terrifying than any rage. He turned the screen toward her. It was a picture of her mother's house in Chicago. The neat little porch, the rose bushes her mom was so proud of. And sitting on the porch railing was a single, dead crow, a traditional omen of death. The message beneath it was simple. We know where you come from. The world tilted. The danger was no longer abstract, no longer just his problem. They had reached across the ocean and put a finger on the one thing in the world she loved. The rival clan wasn't just trying to kill him anymore. They were trying to break him by using her. Something inside Jade fractured. The line between right and wrong, between survival and complicity, blurred into nothing. Her fear was eclipsed by a white-hot, protective rage. Her morality, the principles that had guided her life, became a luxury she could no longer afford. Rio was already speaking quietly into his phone, issuing orders in a voice like splintering ice. He was planning a war. A bloody, head-on assault. It would be brutal, and it would take time. Time her mother might not have. No, she said, her voice low and shaking with a fury that surprised even her. He hung up and looked at her, his eyes black pits of controlled violence. This is not your concern. They use my family. That makes it my concern, she snapped. Your way is too slow. You want to send soldiers? You'll be met with soldiers. You need to cut the head off the snake, not fight the snake. He raised a scarred eyebrow. And you have a better plan, chef. The word, chef, was meant to put her in her place. But she seized it.
Yes.
I do. The leader of the Kudokai, he's a glutton, isn't he? A man who prides himself on his refined tastes. She was pulling from whispers she'd overheard, from the dossier she'd seen on Rio's desk. He's hosting a dinner for his lieutenants in 2 nights. A celebration. Your point. You can't get a gunman in there. But you can get a caterer. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. There are things, compounds, natural things, derived from fugu, certain mushrooms, odorless, tasteless in the right doses. They don't kill. They mimic death. A paralytic that stops the heart for a few minutes before the body metabolizes it. To any doctor, it would look like a massive coronary. An old man with a rich diet having a heart attack at dinner. No poison would be found.
No suspicion.
His lieutenants would see him fall. They would panic. They would turn on each other to seize his territory. The Kudokai would devour itself from the inside out. No war. Just a meal. She had crossed a line. The knowledge came from a molecular gastronomy course, a theoretical lesson on toxins in food. Now she was offering it as a weapon. Offering to use her art, her passion, for something monstrous. The silence in the room was absolute. Rio stared at her, his face an unreadable mask. He was seeing the darkness in her, the part that was willing to do whatever it took to protect her own, the part that mirrored his. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured garden. He stood there for a long time, his back to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was different.
Softer. Almost raw.
I told myself keeping you was a tactical decision, he said, not turning around. A way to control a liability, he paused. I was lying to myself. Jade's breath caught in her throat. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous, far more honest. It was a confession of a truth he had been hiding even from himself. She stood up, her legs unsteady. And I told myself staying here was about survival, she answered, her voice trembling but clear. I think I was lying to myself, too. He turned then, and his eyes found hers across the room. The space between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a terrible, mutual recognition. They were not hero and victim. They were two people willing to burn the world down for the ones they sought to protect. And, in that moment, they had just given each other the match. The plan was a whisper, a ghost of a thing taking shape in the quiet rooms of the safe house. Jade was its architect. She drew diagrams of the kitchen at the restaurant where the Kudo-kai boss would be dining, mapping out the flow of service, identifying the weak points. Rio watched her, his silence a form of intense focus. He saw not a frightened civilian, but a tactician. He provided the resources, blueprints, personnel files on the restaurant staff, and a small, undetectable vial containing the refined pufferfish toxin. She was never more alive, and never more terrified. She was using her life's passion as a weapon of assassination, the lines of her morality irrevocably blurred. This was her choice. She had embraced the darkness to protect the light of her family. The night of the dinner arrived with the oppressive humidity of a coming storm. Jade stood in the back of a refrigerated supply van, dressed in the crisp white uniform of a sous chef. Her hair was tucked under a cap, her face scrubbed clean. She was anonymous. Rio stood with her in the shadows of the van, a ghost in a dark suit. "My man is inside," he said, his voice a low murmur. "He will switch the plates. Your only job is to prepare the dish. Once it is done, you leave. Another car will be waiting a block away." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding. "Jade." He said her name differently than anyone else did. He said it like it was a secret, a word with weight and meaning. It was the first time he had used her name when they were not in immediate danger. "Be careful," he said. It was as close to an expression of concern as he was capable of giving. She slipped into the restaurant's kitchen, a whirlwind of steam, shouting and clattering pans. She was just another hired hand for the night. No one gave her a second look. Her station was desserts, but she had memorized the entire menu. The target dish was a chawanmushi, a savory egg custard, the final course before the sweets. It was delicate, personal, served in individual lidded cups.
Perfect.
The hours crawled by. Jade worked on autopilot, her hands moving with a skill that was deeply ingrained, even as her mind raced. Finally, the order for the chawanmushi came down the line. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rio's man, a dishwasher, gave her a subtle nod. The head chef plated the custards, his back to her for a crucial 10 seconds as he berated a line cook. It was now or never. Moving with a speed she didn't know she possessed, Jade took the vial from her pocket. A single, clear drop fell into the cup destined for the Kudo-kai boss. It dissolved instantly, leaving no trace. But as the waiter came to take the tray, a sous chef intercepted him.
"Wait."
"The boss's cup has a chip on the rim. He will be insulted. Switch it with this 1 inch." He swapped the target's cup with another one from the tray. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Jade. The plan was ruined. The poison would go to the wrong man. Rio's man looked at her, his eyes wide with alarm. Jade didn't think. She acted. She grabbed a pan of sizzling oil and tripped, sending it crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. Hot oil splashed, chefs yelled, and jumped back. In the chaos, she screamed, "Fire!" pointing to the flare-up from the spilt oil. For 30 seconds, the kitchen was bedlam. It was all the time Rio's man needed. He deftly switched the cups back to their original positions. By the time the small fire was extinguished and order was restored, the waiter was gone, the tray on its way to the dining room. Jade's part was done. She slipped out the back delivery door into the humid night air, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She didn't stop running until she reached the designated corner, where a black car waited, its engine humming silently. The drive back to the safe house was the longest of her life. The silence was a crushing weight. Did it work? Did they fail? When she walked back into the traditional house, Rio was standing there, waiting for her. He was holding his phone. He didn't say a word. He simply turned the screen to her. It was a news alert. The head of the Kudo-kai crime family was dead. A suspected heart attack during a private dinner. She had done it. She, Jade, a culinary student from Chicago, had decapitated a major Tokyo crime syndicate. A wave of nausea and triumph washed over her. She had paid a cost, a piece of her soul, but her family was safe. Rio took a step toward her. The space between them was electric. He stopped, his gaze intense, searching. "They will never touch your family again," he said. It was a vow, an oath sealed in the violence she had orchestrated. "What you did,
It was not for me.
it was for them. But it binds you to this world. It binds you to me." His acknowledgement of what she had become, of what she was to him, was absolute. No longer deniable, no longer hidden. She was not just his chef or his liability. She was his equal in darkness. He laid a plane ticket on the table. A first-class, one-way flight to Chicago, leaving the next morning. Beside it, he placed a bank book with an account number. "A new life," he said, his voice flat, betraying no emotion. "You can disappear. You will be protected. You will be free." It was a choice. Go home, back to a world that no longer fit the person she had become. Or stay here, in this beautiful, dangerous world with this beautiful, dangerous man. She looked from the ticket to his face. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the wound he carried for the woman he couldn't protect. She saw the man who had shielded her with his own body. She saw the man who had, against all his instincts, come to trust her. The final paragraph of her old life had been written. She was standing at the beginning of a new, terrifying chapter. She walked past the table, past the ticket offering her escape. She stopped in front of him, so close she could feel the heat from his body. She looked up into his dark, fathomless eyes. She didn't touch him.
She didn't need to.
"I'm not a very good runner," she said softly. A flicker of something, relief, possession, something she couldn't name, passed through his eyes. He didn't smile, but the rigid line of his shoulders eased, just a fraction. It was enough. The choice was made. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the paper screens of the quiet house, washing the city clean.